Wow, it's great to be here with you. It's great to be in Malta. I just want to pick up where Sebastian left off because that really resonated with me. It's just one word I want to pull through, choice. Because I think that's a really powerful word for this moment. When I was standing around my house in 2020, I thought about the labor market. Just like when I looked at the beautiful, magnificent ocean that surrounds us in Malta, I thought what you all were probably thinking about, free trade in a port city, because that's what ocean views inspire in me. I'm sure it's, okay, maybe it's just me. We'll get back to the free trade part. You know, I thought about the labor market and I thought about all the disruption. I can't help but reminding us all that as strong and as tight as the world's global markets are in terms of the workforce, we lost 20 million people in terms of jobs in 6 weeks in 2020. That knowledge, that scarring is still there. And so I thought to myself in 2020, you know, for the next 2, maybe 3 years, we're going to be talking about how do we get those jobs back. But once we do, we're going to have this whole new world in front of us because the changes that we saw were thrust upon us by the pandemic. And we're going to enter into this new phase where change becomes a choice. Well, I declare today, February 1st, in Malta, that's that day. Change is a choice. So what I'd like to do over the next 30 minutes or so is walk you through the 5 things that I'm seeing that will guide and shape that choice to a new world of work. This is a world of work we haven't seen before. It's evolving. But I can tell you, and I can promise you this, my best forecast as an economist ever is that we're not going back to the 2019 world. So this world is a choice. We're going to make it together, and we're going to see how it evolves. So that's my mission for the first 30 minutes. But then we're not done, because in the next 15, I'm going to throw it to you. I want to hear from you. I want to hear your questions. We're going to kind of work this out for a little bit. You're going to ask me some stuff. I'm going to give you some answers. I'm not going to promise they're good answers, but I'll give you some answers, and maybe you'll give me some feedback. So that's how we're going. Hope that works for everybody, and then you get coffee. So they always put the economists before coffee. There's a reason. You'll find out in about 45 minutes, all right? So I'm told that you all represent 32 countries. So I want you to think of one word that describes the state of your economy, your country right now, and just shout it out at me. My friends from the UK, you guys go first. We know you're working through some things right now, but throw out one word for me. What was that? A mess. Okay. Some would call that in the Midwest where I'm from a hot mess, but we'll stick with a mess. Is there another word? Your country and your word? Emerging. I love that word. Resilient. That's a great word. Okay. Is there another? Uncertain. Okay. Resilient, uncertain, messy. That works for us for this morning. Okay, let's take those words forward to the discussion before us, which are the 5 global trends that are going to shape our choice, shape our future, shape the world of work. The first is a slowdown in global growth. We'll talk about that. The second is the return of inflation. It's here, if you haven't noticed. So we'll talk about how long it's going to stay and whether it's going to be like one of my uncles who used to stay too long and then a few months later come back. We might have this kind of house Gus with us for a while, so let's talk about that. Number 3 is wages. They're part of our world of work. They're part of our growth story. 4th is a labor force. You know, as I look at the world's labor force now, I'm struck by the disconnect between wealth and people and how that's affecting our choices. So we'll talk about that. And then finally, we can't stop there with just people and choice. One of the biggest choices we have to make is how robot-friendly we become. Every morning, my pulse is taken by my 15-year-old. He asks me what I did at work or what I will be doing at work that day, and then he decides the probability that my job will be replaced by a robot in the next 6 months. So this is a running thing for him. His father is also an economist, so there's a horse race between us whose job will get automated first. Right now, I'm winning that race. I won't tell you how I'm winning, whether it's more likely to be automated or less. But it all starts with growth. And this IMF projection actually came out yesterday, so it's hot off the presses in terms of what the world's growth picture looks like. I picked on my friend from the UK, not just because he's so witty and easy to pick on, because British people are great with humor, as we all know, but because the UK kind of stands out in this narrative for the IMF. It's the only advanced economy that the IMF thinks will actually see a recession in 2023. This outlook is actually an improvement from the outlook that the IMF put out in October. So what do we have here? We have in 2022 a global growth picture that's the world output in purple of 3.4%. Okay, to put that number in context, the average over the 10 years between 2010 to 2020, and then from also 2000 to 2010 was 3.8%. So at 3.4%, we're just below average in terms of the world's output. Now, we can pull this apart by advanced economies and emerging markets, and you have this representation that spans both. For advanced economies, growth in 2022 was 2.7%, and then for the emerging markets, 3.9%. So it's a world that is growing, but maybe not as quickly. And then let's see what happens this year. This year, we're getting slower growth. So this slow growth scenario is part of our current path. It also looks part of our future path. Our choices now are now shaped by the fact that we can't always count on momentum to drive revenue growth. This thought that we'll just keep running these economies the way we have been in the past to get the profits that we need. That world doesn't quite exist in the same way. There are a few reasons for this. One, geopolitical conflict, and we're seeing and living with that right now with the war in Ukraine. That has overshadowed global growth and will continue to until it's over. But it's not just the Ukraine. We know that we are living in fragile geopolitical times. That's not just the world of politics anymore. That's the world of payroll. And you'll hear from people who've been in that world and had to navigate payroll through unconscionable human conditions, right? Through an invasion. And that's part of this world now. The second thing that we're looking at when it comes to growth is China. China was a big driver of growth heading into the pandemic. But China's lockdown and its COVID-19 policies have kept that economy closed for about 3 years now. There was some good news in Davos. Davos is an interesting place, and we can talk about it over cocktails. But one of the things that you see in Davos is a mood and sentiment shift. It started out a little pessimistic. People were a little glum about the state of the world. By the time we left that week, maybe it was the chocolate. For me, it was definitely the chocolate. There was an improved outlook. But some of that improvement was about China. The fact that China is opening up and that it is expected to be now on the plus side in terms of growth. That's helped and improved the outlook, but even with that improved growth story from China, we're still seeing that in emerging markets, it's not the growth story that we'd like. It's only 4%. We'd like to see that number at 5 or 6% the way it was before the pandemic. For advanced economies, though, like the US, like Europe, the growth story is even slower at 1.2%. That's barely keeping up with inflation. That's saying that for rich countries, we're just treading water. So what drives growth in the future? Well, we'll see some improvement in 2024. But for the global leaders of the world in terms of growth, the traditional stalwarts of the global economy, we're seeing growth look anemic. So who's driving the growth after this? That's when growth becomes a choice, even a regional choice. And that's an important part of our picture and our outlook for the future. So your words of resiliency and mess, I think those words collide on this chart in terms of growth. Another picture that I look at, and we're all looking at this picture, is inflation. So this is an important day, Wednesday, February 1st. Does anyone know what day this is? I know it's free thing, but is there another day? Oh, come on. The Federal Reserve meets today. It's the best day of the month. That's when they're going to decide interest rate policy. You just forgot because you're jet lagged, I'm sure. So at 2 o'clock Eastern time, I will be rudely looking at my phone and watching to see what the Fed announcement would be. And it's likely to be a percentage point increase in the federal funds rate. You all know this. Because the idea is we're going to get inflation down. It's now in the US about 6.6. In Europe, it's below 9%. Everybody's happy. The IMF expects inflation to go all the way down to 6.8% in Europe in 2023, maybe 4% by 2024. Does anyone know what the perfect state of inflation is? And it's not none, it's not zero, believe it or not, but there was another 2. Yeah, someone's paying attention, 2%, that's right. But we're not gonna get close to 2% this year. As much progress is being made, and it's not just the Fed meeting today, the ECB is meeting today, the Bank of England is meeting this week. All these central banks are dedicated to raising up interest rates to curb inflation, slowing their economies in the process. This is not just a 2-year story, though. Something happened during the pandemic. This idea that we could have just-in-time supply chains, that we can be getting our inventory from place to place at a moment's notice was completely disrupted by the pandemic. The idea that you could grow and shrink your workforce at will, that people would be there in the places you needed them to be at the moment you needed them to be there, that was completely disrupted. What that means is, in this new world, where you have geopolitical politics, where you have striking workers. What country has a worker strike today? Yeah, the UK. But it's not just the UK. We've seen strikes in the US, the railroad strike, that was recent. This idea that people you can just put them in modular places in your supply chain has totally been disrupted. What that means is that inflation is not a singular episode just as a result of a pandemic. It means that it's likely going to have legs. That doesn't mean it doesn't come down this year. It just means that we can't expect it to go back to sleep like it did for 40 years in most of the world. That we might have to deal with the risk of inflation for longer and be serious about keeping it contained. So the way the world is keeping it contained right now is by raising interest rates. Anyone here from Latin America? Because I would love to give a Latin American shout out on this slide. The thing about Brazil and Argentina and a lot of the countries in South America is they recognized inflation when they saw it. In Western countries, there was a delayed response. There was this idea that history tells us that disruptions to supply chains are short and they're transitory. And because our historical models told us X, we're going to believe it today. Latin America had a different experience. They said, when you see inflation, you should kill inflation, let's raise rates. They were more successful because they acted earlier. There's a lesson that can be drawn here. We can't stay too rooted in our models. Even the economists, we love models. My world revolves around models. But even I have to understand when those historical patterns no longer apply. That's the same with the business and the world of work, because change is now a choice. So what else are we seeing? Well, another trend are wages. And wages are really definitional, right? I moderated a panel at Davos on living wages, this idea that people need to be paid enough for necessities like covering housing, clothing, shelter costs, in my world, internet. It's really important to cover these basics, right? But many workers around the world aren't getting a living wages. Many workers in advanced economies in Europe and the United States do not get paid living wages. In fact, it's impossible for a two-income family making the minimum federal wage in the United States to afford the average two-bedroom apartment in their location. You can't raise a family on it. And why is it important that we pay people minimum wages, living wages? We have here the lowest wage of OECD countries. That's Mexico, all the way up to the US. Well, the first reason it's important is because of inflation. There's been a cost of living crisis in many countries. They're working more and they're getting paid less, and their dollar isn't going as far as it used to. Their dollar, their euro, their peso, put your favorite currency here. The way to get around this issue is to pay people a higher or fairer wage, and many companies have embraced this issue. Many locations have raised their minimum wages because they understand something, that happier workers are more productive workers. And so that is a choice that individual companies are now making when it comes to their wage profiles. How do we get the most productivity and use compensation as a driver to get there? Again, a choice, not being rooted in this flexible grow and shrink our workforce, but how do we retain and attract and keep and make them more productive? That is a choice that you're seeing take root as we leave this pandemic moment. Now, this one is really interesting to me because it really speaks to the heart of globalization. I'll give you a minute to just take it in. I take a sip of water. What you'll see is something that I've seen almost in every country that I look at. The first graph here is the world's labor force participation. Does anyone, especially those with really insightful analytical chops, can you tell me what that line is doing behind me? Yeah. Some people are just drawing it down. Yeah, it's going down. That's labor force productivity. That's defined as hours worked and output per hours worked, right? That means people are working more and they're producing less goods and services. And that's not just happening in the United States, it's happening all around the world. In the US last year, it was the first year since 1983 where the labor force productivity actually went down for 3 straight quarters. But it's happening everywhere. It's happening around the world. The second part of this chart is also equally interesting if you're looking for a pattern to build a choice on. Here is where the regional shares of the global workforce reside. What you'll notice is that 57% of the global workforce is coming from Asia. And yet, North America is a quarter of global wealth and only 5% of the workforce. At a time when immigration is slow and employment is growing more slowly in this decade than it did in the previous decade, where are these people going to, how are they going to move? How are they going to go to the jobs where they're needed? How is the wealth and the people going to come together and create a labor market that functions efficiently? We haven't solved this issue of lower labor force participation and a more concentrated workforce in absence of a good immigration policy that is global. So what does that mean? Deeper and more persistent labor shortages. So that is another trend that we're confronted with. Even as the world of work recovers, even as wages moderate, even as inflation comes down, we're still stuck with the one thing that you can't grow overnight: people. There's a people shortage. There's a worker shortage. There's a talent shortage, and there's a productivity shortage. And that's all in one of this incorporated in this one chart. So when we talk about globalization, We have to take a step back from that. Davos was all about globalization. Here's how I learned globalization. Here's why when I see an ocean, I think of port cities and trade. Because when I was a young economist, I was taught that free trade was the right way to grow a global economy. And you did free trade when you had a comparative advantage in making something. That meant you can make it easily or more cheaply than any other country. And what you did with that thing that you made is that you traded it with other countries who couldn't make it as well. And so free trade and globalization was founded on the idea of moving stuff and money, right? Goods and capital around the world. Well, that idea of globalization has been turned on its head. It's not just about a world that moves people or uses people to move goods and money. Globalization has entered a new phase, and that phase, I will argue, is a people phase, because it's people who will determine growth. There's only one way countries grow. It's really, really simple. Countries grow when there are more workers, and those workers become more productive. That's it. Doesn't matter whether you're in Beijing, or Singapore, or in Brazil, or in Malta. You only grow one way. It's not the globalization of my microeconomics books. It's the globalization that you see in your business every single day. It's how to get the most out of your people. And that's what this slide tells us. Okay. The fifth global trend that we can't ignore is the one that might be kind of exciting and might be kind of scary, and isn't the best change a little bit of both? How many of you have experimented with ChatGPT? Oh, a lot of people. What did you do? I'm just curious. Is anyone going to tell me what they did with ChatGPT? Virginia? Oh, excellent. That's a good one. Is there any other one? What was that? Okay. I like that one. That's really good, too. I had ChatGPT write an intro to an economic speech in the in the ways of Taylor Swift. I got that from a friend of mine and colleague, Eric Bernjolfsson at Stanford. I thought that that would be a really great way to test its chops, and what we found is that we got some economic verbiage that was both lyrical and poignant, and it really described the moment. So ChatGPT is really an evolution, but it's not going to actually get us there. The issue, what we're seeing in terms of the digital divide, is that it's growing. In some sense, we're getting a lot more internet friendly as a global community, right? So in 2005, only 1 billion people had access to the internet. By 2020, that was almost 60% of the world that had access to the internet. And yet, when I tell you that productivity has fallen, it's because we are not adapting to this technology. It exists, but it's not actually helping us be more productive as workers. Why? Well, one, it could be that we're measuring it wrong. If you hold up your cell phones, anybody want to just, yeah, there you go. Just hold it up, it's okay. Is it a phone? Is it a camera? Is it where you do your taxes? Is it where you do your homework if you're a child? Is it where you make social connections? Do you meet your wife or your best friends? Do you communicate with, the world at large? What do you do with your phone? And maybe we're just not measuring it right, and that's why the world has become less productive, or maybe we're just looking at it all the time, and that's why we're less productive. It's hard to tell. The phone could go either way. Maybe it's because that despite all this technology, businesses haven't really changed the way they've done business. They haven't adapted. They haven't embraced it. Maybe we have a workforce that needs to be reskilled. That might be why workers haven't become productive. I think it's all of these things. And at the end of the day, what you're left with is a choice. And this is a choice that I'm actually working on in real time with Stanford and with other academics about what's going to happen with AI and the future of work. Is it going to be, one, labor saving or labor enhancing? And this fork in the road is not predetermined. It's a choice. And it's a choice that you will be making as you adapt technology in your own businesses as well. So the bottom line is that we need to grow a digitally skilled workforce because we've become more digital as a community. There will be short-term disruptions in terms of this digital transformation. We know that. We know that digital transformation comes with job loss. But the idea is, how do we minimize those losses and actually reinvest in people to get them ready for the right track? And that involves a certain amount of personalization. It's not about just mass adoption of technology. It's making that technology personal. So let's talk a little bit about how we did that, how we can think about that. One place to look is a survey. I love a good survey. I have a good friend who's really excellent at doing surveys. You'll hear from him this afternoon. But what we did in this survey is we took about 32,000 workers around the world in 17 countries, and we asked them some questions about their attitudes to their current working conditions. And what's been really remarkable about doing the survey with ADP and with our friends in ESI for the last 3 years is how much sentiment has changed and shifted during the pandemic. So I'm going to share with you some highlights. We'll give you the full survey in a couple of months. But this is just a breakdown of where we looked in terms of countries, in terms of the split between gig workers and traditional workers. You can see we have good representation in 4 major regions: Latin America, Europe, North America, and the Asia-Pacific region. And so the first question we asked that I found really, really compelling is, what, if anything, is most important to you in a job? And the result that I shared with you in Miami last year, for those of you who were there, was this one: flexibility of hours worked. It scored high on our list last year. It was actually the #3 most desirable trait of the job after salary and job security. Let me tell you, salary will never go out of style as #1. I don't care what anyone says. Salary is always the most important. Job security is very important. But last year, people cared about flexibility. This year, what happened? Well, what we're seeing is a new focus, not just on flexibility, but these other 2 things, something I hadn't heard in a long time: enjoyment of a day's work. You're supposed to do that? Oh my gosh. Career progression, that's back in style again. Despite this talk of quiet quitting, people actually do want to grow their careers. And it's amazing how much that sentiment has shifted in just a year. There was a desire for flexibility. For sure, it's still there, but other things are now being prioritized. And I think this is a question, again, of choice. Where do we put our efforts? Is it about flexibility? Do we double down on hybrid? Or do we go to where the puck is moving, towards career progression and making work enjoyable again? That's a choice. You know, there's always this sense, if you're worried about job security, to move to the most secure field you can move to. When my job is eventually automated, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to become a gardener, because robots have a really hard time picking weeds out of fields. So I know where I'm a Midwestern girl. I know where to put my talents when the robots come to town. But a lot of people think that tech and information is the most secure industry to go to. But anyone seen a tech headline these days? So we know that even though the world thinks that tech and information is where you find job security, that's also very tenuous if you look at the news. Education and health is another place. Finance and real estate services is #3. Leisure and hospitality, a field that's been slow to recover worldwide after the pandemic, shows that weakness here. But this is what our workforce, when they think about the future, they're thinking about security, they go to tech. And yet we live in a world where tech adoption has not helped us. It's made us less productive. So we need to square the circle as a business community. How do we make tech secure? And how do we allow tech to make all these other industries secure so that people can actually make a living wage? This is all part of the same connected circle in terms of the workforce and where we're heading. Another trend that we saw during the pandemic is that people were working more hours for free, and it led to all kinds of messy issues. I like the word messy, Graham. I'm going to keep using that. It led them to feel stressed. It led to some mental health issues. It led to health concerns. Pre-pandemic, on average, people spent about 7 hours working for free. In the heart of the pandemic, it jumped to 9 hours working for free, and now you can see it's still elevated. It's still in that 8 range. It's come down, but it's still high. And here's the breakout by country. Europe works less for free. North America and Asia Pacific work more for free. So that's where you're seeing the real disconnect between work and pay actually reside. That's also, if you look at our survey results, these are the places where people are feeling the most stress as well. So it's not just about compensation, it's really being, as an employer, very focused in on your workers' mental health and how much they're working. And it brings in all these uncomfortable issues in terms of monitoring and balance and vacation times and pulling that all together. Again, a choice for companies. We also know that payroll errors are still an issue. And these errors are magnified in a cost of living crisis, right? There are some countries and some communities, if you don't get paid, you don't eat that night well. You're not able to pay your rent in that month. And so this issue of pay, and in terms of a high inflationary environment, is just more exacerbated. And that's why the payroll industry is more important than ever, because we don't think we're going back to a world that's less complex and easier to navigate. In fact, geopolitics, climate change, populism, all of these big global issues will make the world more complicated, harder to navigate, and that's why essential functions like pay are so vital to the global economy and to globalization itself. A lot of workers are expecting a raise. That's good to know. How many of us are expecting it? No, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands on that one. My bosses are in the audience. I better not. But we're seeing that there's still an expectation that wages keep up with inflation. This is what the Fed, the ECB, and the Bank of England, this is what they're actually worried about. They're worried about the fact that workers are going to ask for more money to keep up with inflation, which will kick off and continue this wage price spiral. So this is why I think they're going to keep raising rates and interest rates higher to make sure that inflation is tamed enough that you won't have to be subject to these trends on the worker level. They need more money to make as much this year as they did last year. And until inflation is contained, that's going to be the state of their world. A couple more things for workers. It's not just about pay, though pay is a big one. I'm going to leave off a one-off bonus, because in my economist mind, that's not a lot different from pay. But workers also are willing to trade off some amount of pay for time off, or flexible time, for shorter work weeks. We actually have some data on shorter work weeks that I'll talk to you about in a second. We still see a world that is on the move. Workers are willing, more than they were pre-pandemic, to consider changing jobs. It's never been more easy to change jobs in this world, in this hybrid remote world where there's labor shortages and lots of job postings. It's easy to change jobs, and that's something employers have to navigate as well. Increased turnover, a revolving door workforce, and the resistance sometimes in getting workers in the door when you need them the most. One more chart here in terms of future gazing and the questions that we asked our workers to think about is, which of the following do you think will be the norm in your industry? And approximately 1/3 of workers expect a full flexibility in their work hours based on productivity and results. Okay, 2/3 don't. So we're really in a camp here where a lot of the workforce has moved or expanded or even evolved their ideas of flexibility. And maybe it's not the be-all, end-all that it was even last year. This belief is held mainly among people who, yes, can do their work more flexibly, and in manufacturing, those who can't. So I find that an interesting comparison and contrast. We also asked people whether or not they would be in favor of a 4-day work week. This is the idea. I actually looked it up because I didn't want to take it for granted. This is doing as much work as you can do in 40 hours, but only doing it in 32 hours. And I thought about that. I'm like, could I really shrink the 5 days of this week to 4? I could, but it would be 4 very long days. So I'm not sure, no one ever talks about how you pull this off. What they talk about is whether or not people want it. So I find that an interesting, because I want a whole kind, I'll tell you all kinds of things I want. I'm sure I can't get them yet, though. So this question on the 4-day work week has to be in the same breath as the question on productivity and how we help people be more productive so they can work less hours and produce more. So the last is on skills. I'll let you read that in the report, but I think that it's funny that the biggest skill the workers think that they need in the future is management skills. Forget data skills, people skills. We're just gonna manage things. We're gonna sit in our 4-day work week and manage our days. I love this result because it really talks about human nature when it comes, let's do less and manage more, not invest in some other skills. But we know that people skills are important and technical skills will be important. I'll leave with this one. Only 15% of workers think that empathy will be important for their role. So maybe we can challenge that a little bit as the business community by being empathetic ourselves to the worker. So this is the conclusion. I would like to use this concluding slide to kind of think through your questions in terms of the global economy, in terms of the future of work, in terms of the choices that you're going to make. And if you want to ask your questions in front of your peers, I'll give you some time to take some pictures of the slides. Is there a question? I think we have microphones here as well. Yeah, I forgot to plant them, so I need authentic questions. If there's anyone, I've asked them. There we go.
Gig workers and regular workers?
Yeah. First we noticed that the appetite for, that's a great question. First we noticed that the appetite for gig work has been reduced by the pandemic. My assumption is now that many of our jobs can be more flexible, hybrid, and remote, you don't need the gig work as much. Also, people are reducing their hours overall, so the second job that's often a gig job is not as attractive. We also found that gig workers were more likely to want to work part-time. They're more likely to work for free, believe it or not, have unpaid hours that go unpaid in the delivery of their goods and services. And they're more likely to feel stress and mental health. So there was a sense that gig working during the pandemic was a little bit more stressful than before the pandemic. So another question here. Hi.
Yes, so the question I got is about productivity. Do you think that increasing productivity can compensate the loss in inflation?
Yes. So this is something I've written about a lot, both for ADP and for other nonprofits in the academic space. Productivity is the solution. We rely a lot on our central banks to get inflation down. But their instrument is really blunt, right? They're going to raise interest rates, reduce growth, and hopefully, if all goes well, there'll be enough job losses in the global economy that we won't see the labor shortages and the wages stoke inflation. This is a really mean way to bring down inflation. It's a very short-term way to bring it down inflation. There's another way. Another way looks like this. It's a much brighter picture, right? You actually make workers more productive. You invest in their skills, you make them want to come to work more, you make them like their jobs, you give them training, They work less, they produce more, and in any system, if you can produce more with fewer costs, what happens? You become more profitable. That makes Don happy. He's looking at the revenues. They've gone up. His costs have gone down. It makes the worker happy because when they're producing more, they make more money, but there's more stuff to buy, which is cheaper. What it does is it raises the standards of living for everyone. So there's this good approach of lowering inflation. That means increasing productivity. It might need a government partner or a business action. But then there's this short-term approach that's kind of wicked, and it's painful. So I know which one I'd rather have, but right now we're stuck with the central banks because they're the only game in town. But this is a choice that governments and companies can make. So I love that question.
Neela, it's Liz Rennie. I just wanted to ask, do you think the Feds are baking in the fact that the Ukraine war might end at some point, or is it based on everything being equal and nothing changing in the Ukraine situation?
I don't think they're baking in that particular fact. First of all, the Federal Reserve itself tries not to actually care too much about the rest of the world when making its policy. It's really domestic focused, even though its policy affects almost every country in the world. Secondly, geopolitics is probably part of our next 20, 30, 50 years. So even as we see tampering down in one area, it's likely we'll see hotspots in the other, and all of those will involve transfers of energy demand and supply, which affect global supply chains and inflation. So yeah, I wouldn't think that that's part of their calculus. What they're focused on is the labor market and whether or not they can slow growth enough to reduce demand, to increase unemployment, in order to prevent this wage growth spiral that leads to inflation. So it's not coming from peace on earth, it's coming from something a little more direct in terms of the labor market. Though peace on earth would be the first best way to lower inflation, I agree.
Hi, yeah. Got a question around slowing growth. So we see a lot of slowing growth. What are your thoughts about no growth future?
A no-growth future? I mean, once growth gets so low, it's basically a no-growth future. If you are barely growing to keep up with population growth, it's a no-growth future. And I think one of the issues I have with commentators, I listen to TV like everyone else, is that we started talking about recession like way too early. It's like buying, if you're in the US, Halloween candy in February. Halloween's in October. We kept talking about recession. And so every data point became about recession. But I don't even think recession is the worst risk for the world. To me, the worst risk is not a recession, because recessions have endpoints. They trough, and then the economy grows again. What could be riskier for the world is stagnation, where we just don't grow, or we barely grow to keep up with population. We have the slow growth trend. And so that's why the picture that I showed you before, where you see advanced economies growing at under 2% for 2 years out, is concerning. Because then what triggers that rebound? What investments are those economies going to make to push growth out? Before, the world was relying on China to deliver its growth and to grow East Asia, and that was going to be the engine of growth. And there are countries in Asia, like India, for example, which is a growth shining star, but India's economy cannot match China's economy in terms of the size of it. So how long are we going to wait for India to replace China? Well, we can't. So where's the growth going to come from? And I think that's the decision that the world is waiting for someone to figure out. Any other questions? So I'm going to wrap up with some reflections and some thoughts in terms of what we've talked about together. Remember, we started out with Sebastian and his 100 things. Like, I think all of those things are super, super cool. I only do one thing. I have one move. I'm an economist. So I picked up on the one word that really resonated with my economic nature, which is choice. And I led you through 5 different trends that could affect your choice in the future. I think the issue in terms of the global world is to redefine globalization to a people-focused rather than a capital and goods-focused view of the world. If we can get there together, I think you'll see all of these positive outcomes. Productivity, like the question in the back, growth, like this question here on the side, coming together with a digital economy that is technologically advanced and workers who are able to actually improve and be enhanced by that technology. It's not that hard. We know the solutions. It's just all of us working together as a global community to make them happen. So hopefully that's the positive note, the silver lining that I'd like to end on as we go through with the rest of 2023. Remember that growth happens, but change is a choice. So the choice is yours. Thanks for your time.